Hey, this is the voice in your head, or at least this is the voice in your ears. And I'm here to tell you to stop worrying about the uncertain future. You're not even guaranteed the next moment. Who told you you would necessarily get tomorrow? Who told you that? They don't know. Nobody knows. The future is uncertain. And you know what? The primary cause of unhappiness, it's never the situation, but it's the thought about the situation. You're worried about something that may or may not happen. So stop. Be aware of the thoughts you are thinking. Separate them from the situation, which is always neutral. It is as it is. Eckhart Tolle. I'm Pete Dominick, and it's time to stand up with me right now. Hey guys, I thought I'd just start the show a little differently. I wasn't really talking to you as much as I was myself. That's part of my daily practice. Trying to be mindful, practice mindfulness, try to stay in the moment and not be terrified of what the future may bring or what it might hold. And no experience in our lives instructs that more to us than the pandemic. I think that we have been living through that uncertainty. I'm certain you all have your own personal experiences that also illustrate that to be the truth. I know I have mine. But try to stay in the moment as much as you can. And easy for me to say now that I'm doing a little better because of you and this podcast, and it's helping me support my family. And I'm not sure that October, November 2019, Pete Dominick would have been comforted by this. So if it's of no comfort, I hear you. And I'm here for you. So reach out if you'd like. I'd love to talk. I talk to everybody all the time. I love talking to people. Talked to a lot of people today. I talked to Frank Walton, who is longtime listener Francis's brother. You may know Frank from our Zoom hangouts if you ever attended any of those. And we had an awesome conversation, and I'm probably going to post that, I don't know, maybe later this week or next week. It's evergreen. It's just a great conversation, and really happy about it and that I got to know Frank better. Also, talked to Sean Kiernan, and he is who I am sharing with you today. Sean is a fascinating dude. He is a Marine Corps, United States Marine, a veteran, and he lost both of his legs to an IED in Fallujah, Iraq. And I talked to him all about his life and his career in the military. He is now an activist and a writer. And I just had such an enlightening, insightful, and brutally honest conversation with Sean Kiernan for today's podcast. And I'm super proud of it. I've always been very interested in veterans and the veterans community and war and peace and geopolitics. I've interviewed so many veterans and experts on policy, writers like Matt Gallagher and Elliot Ackerman, who are also, of course, veterans themselves. You probably are familiar with Paul Rieckhoff, who is a regular on the show. Zoe Bedard and Allison Jaslow and Andrew Basevich and Tom Ricks, who's a military historian. The years I've interviewed so many more veterans and military experts and foreign policy experts. I've always been fascinated by it, and I think it's really important to think about what threats, national security threats, we are facing today. We heard from Chris Wray, the head of the FBI, about the threat that is white supremacy and right-wing anti-government terrorists. And that is why I think it's interesting to hear from Sean today to talk about all that he lost and all that he gave to the war in Iraq, and what for what threat. And so that's how I'm thinking about my conversation with Sean today, thinking about how we should be resourcing and be concerned about the threats that we're facing. And so I think you're really going to like that conversation. And now I want to get to the first part of the show, the first news segment. It's time for the last 24 hours in news, what I call the last 24. Okay, here we go. On Monday, the 2nd of March, we learned that the United States is expecting to have a large enough supply of coronavirus vaccines to vaccinate every adult in the nation by the end of May. Woo-hoo! Summer could be awesome. The World Health Organization warned that the global number of new coronavirus cases rose for the first time in nearly 2 months. Texas and Mississippi ended their statewide mask mandates in the meantime. Like I said, we heard from FBI Director Christopher Wray, who told the Senate Judiciary Committee that the January 6th insurrection was an inspiration to a number of terrorist extremists. Also, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office has increased its focus on the Trump Organization's chief financial officer as part of the financial fraud investigation, shades of the Al Capone investigation, and President Trump's nominee for the Office of Management and Budget, Neera Tanden, decided to pull her name from consideration for that job. I saw this tweet from someone I follow, this woman, smart woman on Twitter, at Jojo from Jers, writes, "For years, the former guy attacked via Twitter women, men, a 4'11" teenager. He endorsed and incited violence. He name-called, he mocked, and Republicans, quote, didn't see the tweet. They said nothing. But now, a mean tweet, it's disqualifying. Sexism, bigotry, hypocrisy. Thy name is the GOP. Of course, she's referring to the fact that Republican senators focused on Neera Tanden's former tweets that they didn't like to disqualify her as the job of the OMB director. Really, really disappointing and, yeah, hypocritical. But back to good news. Here is Joe Biden, this announcement about where we're at with the vaccines.
Johnson & Johnson and Merck will work together to expand the production of Johnson & Johnson's vaccine. We also invoked the Defense Production Act to equip 2 Merck facilities to the standards necessary to safely manufacture the J&J vaccine. And with the urging and assistance of my administration, Johnson & Johnson is also taking additional new actions to safely accelerate vaccine production. Johnson & Johnson's vaccine manufacturing facilities will now begin to operate 24/7. Here's what all this means. We're now on track to have enough vaccine supply for every adult in America by the end of May.
And as is sometimes a cycle here in the news and with world events and current events, you get all excited about some good news, and then immediately bad news is announced. And that's how I interpret the announcement from the governor of Texas, Governor Abbott, today, who said this.
Effective next Wednesday, all businesses of any type are allowed to open 100%.
No! Oh, we're so close! We're so close, Texas!
That includes any type of entity in Texas. Also, I am ending the statewide mask mandate.
Why? Terrible timing. We need 8 or 12 more weeks to hold the virus at bay, just long enough to avoid one more big spike in Texas. No, not you. That's where we're all, so many young people are going to be going on spring break, South Padre Island, and then bringing the virus back to their families and their grandparents. And it's just so frustrating and disheartening. And here now to some more commentary outside of mine. Here is former medical director of the Bush White House, Dr. Jonathan Reiner. He is on CNN, where Aaron Burnett asked him if the mask mandates, I've been talking about Texas, they also are announced the same announcement in Mississippi, if they are a mistake. And here is Dr. Jonathan Reiner.
Oh, this is a gigantic mistake. In Texas, for instance, they have a test positivity rate of 13.5%. Compare that to, the overall rate in the United States of 4.4%. They had 54,000 cases last week. That's 12% of all the cases in the United States. They also had more than 10% of the deaths in the United States. The state, by the way, has 8% of the population in this country. So they are not doing well. So, this is obviously a political ploy on the part of the governor, who is just coming out of a horrible winter storm under intense criticism for the state's performance in a state where basically millions of people were freezing in the dark. And now, in an attempt to appease the public, do something that he thinks they want, he's going to endanger the lives of millions of Texans. This is his, mission accomplished moment, and it's not a good one. We've seen this movie, and it doesn't turn out well.
And a similar reaction from the experts, even over on Fox News, where former CDC Director Dr. Richard Besser was asked by Neil Cavuto on Fox News what he thought of the move in Texas and Mississippi.
Neil, I find it really concerning. I am so optimistic that we're on the road to safely seeing this pandemic wind down, and that requires getting vaccine to all adults. It requires as well, though, following the guidance of public health. And there's a lot of concerning factors right now. It's wonderful to see overall the numbers going down around the country, but it's leveling off in a number of places. And that's concerning at a time when we're seeing variants arising across the country that could spread more easily and could cause more problems, even among some people who've had disease before. We know that masks work. We're trying to get children back into school. It's so important we see this as a national effort and not something that is politically linked. I'm looking forward this week, Neil. CDC is going to be putting out guidance for what people can expect to do once they're vaccinated. What aspects of their life can they get back to in a safe way? And if we follow the guidance of public health on this, we will all get back to getting our economy up and running in a safe and sustainable way, rather than seeing kind of the seesaw of spikes in disease that will again lead to further shutdowns.
Now, let me go to a couple of my favorite experts on Twitter. Dr. Megan May, who's a listener, subscriber, and guest on this show, reacts to this news with, this should go well, by which I mean this will not go well. Remember when we did this last May or June and lots of people got sick and died or wound up permanently affected? Anyone? That's her reaction to Texas and Mississippi saying they're lifting COVID-19 restrictions, including mask mandates. A day after, by the way, CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky warned states now is not the time to do so. My friend Dr. Craig Spencer writes, in lifting the mask mandate, Governor Abbott says, quote, we're ensuring that all businesses and families in Texas have the freedom to determine their own destiny. Sounds nice, but overlooks the fact that this is a respiratory virus spread person to person, regardless of one's, quote, destiny. And Craig goes on in subsequent tweets and writes, hi, wonderful people of Texas. Even if those around you refuse to wear a mask, wearing one yourself helps protect you against hashtag COVID-19. Be careful. There's still a lot of virus out there. And finally, here is reaction on MSNBC from the chairman of the Texas Democrats. His name is Gilberto Hinojosa.
Insanity. I'd like to say that Governor Abbott has lost his mind by doing this. When we have 90% of the people of the state of Texas that haven't been vaccinated, we're 49th in the country in vaccine distribution. We have some of the highest rates of COVID in the nation and the highest number of deaths among all the states in the country. But what he's doing now is something that has nothing to do with what's right and wrong, but everything to do with politics. I don't know if you know this, but the Republican Executive Committee in the state of Texas condemned him for having a mask mandate. The chairman of the Republican Party in Texas demonstrated in front of the governor's mansion because he did this and because he closed down the businesses and threatened to run against him. What Greg Abbott is doing is putting his own political career over the interest of the people of the state of Texas.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what this is all about. It's hard. It's hard. None of this has been easy. Really hard for business owners. I totally get it. I'm a stand-up comedian who makes good money performing live in venues across the country. I get it. But you know what's harder? Losing people that you love. It's as simple as that to me. All right. Well, that is the big news on COVID-related stuff from the White House and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine to the announcements from Texas and Mississippi. The Supreme Court seemed ready on Tuesday to uphold these awful restrictive voting laws from Arizona, which will set the stage for what's going to happen in the future as Republicans who are dominating many state legislatures, especially because of gerrymandering, are going to do everything they can to make voting more difficult, specifically for people who are not likely to vote for them. And of course, since the election in November and the president and his supporters' lies that the balloting was rigged, Republican-run state legislatures have passed hundreds of new laws that makes it harder for people to vote. And a lot of these laws are going to be challenged in court. Tuesday, the Supreme Court heard arguments that could set parameters for which of these laws are going to live and which are going to die. And I'll be talking with Professor Eric Siegel on tomorrow's podcast about that. Siegel wrote today on Twitter, "Good morning. Arizona wants to limit people of color from voting. Today, its lawyers will argue in the Supreme Court that their restrictions on voting aren't about that. They won't be called out for this. This is American racism still in full bloom. Tragic." And apparently at some point during the oral arguments, Justice Brett Kavanaugh referred to states as certain states as having no history of discrimination, and Siegel tweeted about that. Kavanaugh refers to states with no history of discrimination. There are no such states in real life. There are just states that discriminated less than others. And Midwind Charles responded that not less, but different. And thought those were two good reactions. I'll talk more at length with Professor Siegel, of course, on tomorrow's podcast. So tweet me or email me your questions about this for him. standupwithpete@gmail.com. Unfortunately, we don't have audio or video, and Siegel has always argued for cameras in the courtroom, but we do have transcripts. And in the Supreme Court arguments yesterday, Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who should not be a justice, asked the question, what is the interest of Republicans in keeping laws that suppress minority voters on the books? And the Republican lawyer argued, well, it puts us at a competitive disadvantage relative to Democrats. Politics is a zero-sum game. And the reaction to that exchange exploded online from constitutional law experts, and I'm sure I'll be talking about that with Siegel as well. But most of it was, wow, they said the quiet part out loud. The other big story from the last 24 in Washington, D.C. was that the director of the FBI, Christopher Wray, testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee about the investigation into the assault on the U.S. Capitol. And here's a little mashup of some of his comments from his opening.
Citizens from around the country have sent us more than 270,000 digital media tips. Some have even taken the painful step of turning in their friends or their family members. But with their help, we've identified hundreds of suspects and opened hundreds of investigations in all but one of our 56 field offices. And of those identified, we've arrested already more than 270 individuals to date, over 300 when you include the ones of our partners. Unfortunately, as you noted, Mr. Chairman, January 6th was not an isolated event. The problem of domestic terrorism has been metastasizing across the country for a long time now, and it's not going away anytime soon.
Well, that's haunting, but I've been talking about the threat that right-wing, anti-government, white supremacist terrorists have been posing for over 10 years. Been talking to experts on this issue. So I guess I'm just not as shocked by it. I've been watching it. I've been seeing it. I've been interviewing experts about it. I've been talking to people to try to prevent it and de-radicalize people. And so it's not shocking, although it is terrifying, depressing, scary, but it doesn't mean we give up on talking about it or talking with our friends, our neighbors, and our community about white supremacists and making friends with people from other backgrounds and ethnicities and helping them create opportunities. And now I'm ranting. But here is Senator Chris Coons from Delaware questioning the FBI Director, Chris Wray.
Has there so far been any evidence that the January 6th riot here, the insurrection, was organized by people simply posing as supporters of President Trump's?
We have not seen any evidence of that, certainly at this
Is there any evidence at all that it was organized or planned or carried out by groups like Antifa or Black Lives Matter?
We have not seen any evidence to that effect thus far in the investigation.
And is there any doubt that the people who stormed the Capitol included white supremacists and other far-right extremist organizations?
There's no doubt that it included individuals that we would call militia violent extremists, and then in some instances, individuals that were racially motivated violent extremists who advocate for, the superiority of the white race.
And speaking of the insurrection on the Capitol of January 6th, here is one of the organizers and financial supporters, a conspiracy theorist and white supremacist, as far as I'm concerned, himself, Alex Jones, on leaked videos saying that he's sick of Donald Trump and he wishes he never met him.
The selfish part.
There's another part?
Wishes I'd never met Donald Trump.
Huh.
Wishes that I'd never met Roger Stone. Because unlike previous things I'd done that were game-changing.
What?
Those were just time-space continuum reflections.
No, doesn't make any sense.
Of the third big change I was going to be involved in.
What?
That was bringing Donald John Trump into Austin.
Oops.
So I said it again. I said Austin into office. Because you guys are actually really good questions. This is going to be a really good thing. But
this is just an amazing thing, this video. I'm kind of obsessed with Alex Jones. I mean, I never watch his show, but when I see clips of him, I get very interested in him. He's clearly either a very good, dedicated, committed performer, which I've seen plenty of, or he is an insane lunatic. But he just misspoke there. You heard him misspeak. And now he takes a pause, and he says, I'm going to take a drink, and then he just makes shit up. And then he goes back and starts talking again.
I'm going to say it again in a minute. Let's drink some of this Armani. I'll try to say it.
What?
It's the truth, and I'm just going to say it, that I wish I never would have fucking met Trump. I wish it never would have happened. And it's not that the attacks that I've been through. I'm so sick of fucking Donald Trump, man. Huh. God, I'm fucking sick of him. Huh. I'm not doing this because it's like I'm kissing his fucking ass. It's just like I'm sick of it. I'll do it in a minute.
I'll do it in a minute. He says, I'll do it in a minute. He's going to come back and finish his take. This is footage leaked from the Southern Poverty Law Center, and it's from a filmmaker who was hired to shoot a propaganda film called You Can't Watch This, that produced this outtake. The conspiracy theorist Alex Jones' comments disparaging Trump are, of course, emblematic of his cynical business model, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center. The leaked footage contrasts starkly with Jones' public rhetoric about Trump. Jones' talk show, InfoWars, promoted and idealized Trump daily throughout both the 2016 presidential campaign and the former president's time in office. Check it out if you want to know more at splcenter.org, Southern Poverty Law Center. Oh, man, that's fascinating. That guy is just the absolute worst. If you said, Pete, who's the worst? I'd say Alex Jones, slam dunk, done. Then Hannity, but first Alex Jones for sure. I mean, now that Rush is dead. Rush, then Alex Jones, then Hannity, but now Alex Jones, then Hannity. Got it? Okay. And honorable mentions to F. Steven Crowder, Don Bongino, and Ben Shapiro. I despise all of them as well. Okay, sorry I mentioned those names and that I lashed out. For here's Senator Bernie Sanders saying, I promise you we're going to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour.
I don't know about this bill. We're going to bring up the amendment tomorrow. We'll see how many votes we get. But this I will tell you. $7.25 an hour is a starvation wage, as you've indicated. It has not been raised by Congress since 2007. We got millions of people in this country who are working 40 hours a week, are living in poverty. And I promise you, we are going to raise that minimum wage to $15 an hour. If not this week, we will do it sometime soon. We have the majority leader here in the Senate supportive of it. We have the Speaker of the House, Pelosi, supportive of it. The vast majority of the American people are supportive. And the idea that we have a parliamentarian who was elected by nobody, who was simply a Senate staffer, making a determination that 30 million Americans are not going to get a pay raise is, to me, unacceptable. So we're going to win this, if not this week, in the near future.
I love the burn. Feel the burn, Bernie Sanders. He's almost always right on policy, economic policy stuff. In my opinion, what the hell do I know? And finally, one more big story that drove yesterday in the last 24 was the news that 6 Dr. Seuss books, including And to Think That I Saw It on Mulberry Street and If I Ran the Zoo, will stop being published because of racist and insensitive imagery, according to the business that preserves and protects Dr. Seuss's legacy. These books portray people in ways that are hurtful and wrong. Dr. Seuss Enterprises told the Associated Press in a statement that coincided with the late author and illustrator's birthday. Ceasing sales of these books is only part of our commitment and our broader plan to ensure Dr. Seuss Enterprises catalog represents and supports all communities and families. And the outrage, the outrage, folks. It came pouring in hard and fast. Here is House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy of California debating the voting rights bill and invoking the Dr. Seuss nonsense.
H.R. 1 rewrites election law and imposes a one-size-fits-all partisan rules from Washington. Under the Constitution, we generally defer to states and counties to run elections. Democrats want to change that. First, they outlawed Dr. Seuss, and now they want to tell us what to say.
The Democrats didn't outlaw Dr. Seuss. Nobody outlawed Dr. Seuss. All of Dr. Seuss's books are available, and this is Dr. Seuss's own company deciding, you know what, some of Dr. Seuss's work was probably not great. A couple more reactions, David Packman on Twitter. The funniest thing about the Dr. Seuss fiasco is that now the Trumpian right expects us to believe they care about literature in any context outside of serving their brazen political opportunism. And Ellie Mistal tweeted at LENYC, just to put a pin in the Seuss thing, there's not a black parent my age that I know who hasn't had the unique experience of opening a new Seuss story, starting to read it and realizing that it's too racist to continue and changing it on the fly in front of the kids. And I quoted that tweet saying, I honestly had no idea about this, but I'm open to hearing all of those who do, especially someone like Ellie Mistal. And finally, New York Times, Ezra Klein tweets, it says a lot about the modern GOP that Biden and the Democrats are about to pass a $1.9 trillion bill with dozens of longtime liberal priorities. And what's really generating the heat on the right is some nonsense about Dr. Seuss. And by the way, I'd add, don't mention Mr. Potato Head. Congressman Ted Lieu says, do ordinary Americans care about the 6 relatively unknown Dr. Seuss books that the publisher is no longer going to publish? No. That's why Democrats are focused on stimulus checks. And since one of the Dr. Seuss books made fun of my ethnicity, I'm glad the free market canceled it. Journalist David Gura, previously I hadn't heard, never mind seen any of these 6 Dr. Seuss titles. Jill Filipovich, an 11-year-old boy froze to death in Texas because of an infrastructure failure. Our healthcare system is so broken that a 7-year-old girl started a lemonade stand to pay for her own brain surgery. And conservatives think the top story is Dr. Seuss. And finally, comedian Mike Birbiglia. When Dr. Seuss died in 1991, the minimum wage was $4.25 an hour. Currently, it's $7.25 an hour. I feel like that's the Dr. Seuss story we should be talking about. Oh, the places minimum wage won't take you when there's stagnating wage growth. Comedian Mike Birbiglia. Okay, that's it for the last 24. Now it's on to today's news dump. Not politics, not COVID, undercovered. Time for the news dump.
What's the score there at the door? Last 24 news dump.
Yeah, that's a John Carroll joint. Thank you for the news dump jingle. John Carroll sent them my way, everybody. The Associated Press, I want to start with Connecticut and the Associated Press, where somebody went and bought a small porcelain bowl at a yard sale in Connecticut for $35, and it turned out to be a rare 15th century Chinese artifact worth between $300,000 and $500,000. Now going to go on an auction at Sotheby's. And the point of the story is be sustainable. Go to garage sales and yard sales, buy used things, and maybe you can turn them into really expensive, very high worth things that could be life-changing. All right, get to your local yard garage sale or host one yourself. Sad news coming out of the Los Angeles Zoo, where a giraffe has died after undergoing a procedure to deliver her stillborn calf. According to the zoo announcement yesterday, the 12-year-old Maasai giraffe's name was Hasina, and she died unexpectedly Monday night after a team of 30 zoo staffers had removed the full-term stillborn calf in a 5-hour procedure that morning. That's sad news. And let's stay with the sad theme for one more story to tell you about the horrific car accident on the American-Mexico border, where apparently there were 25 people stuffed into an SUV that is supposed to only safely carry 8 people. 10 of them were Mexican nationals, and 13 of them were killed in a head-on collision with a semi. Horrific story coming out of Southern California, where a crash killed 13 of 25 people crammed into an SUV. A critically endangered wolves have been released in North Carolina. This is a good story. The state is the only place in the world where red wolves are roaming free, and this is thanks to the good work of my friends at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that said yesterday that it brought 2 male wolves from a Florida wildlife refuge, paired them with wild female wolves from North Carolina, and let them loose in February. And so I think that's a cool story to mention in the news dump. And while I'm at it, here's another good news story. This one coming from ABC News, reporting that hundreds of students who were abducted from an all-girls boarding school in northwestern Nigeria last week have been released. Gunmen kidnapped 317 students from the school, and they have been released, and the Nigerian military conducted a joint operation to rescue the schoolgirls, and it's awesome, awesome news, and I'm really happy to report that too. See, there are lots of good stories out there today. And finally, the city of Petaluma, California has just done something no other city in the U.S. has done, according to Gizmodo. It's banned the construction of new gas stations. And coverage of the decision suggests Petaluma won't be alone for long as shift continues toward electric cars. City Council unanimously approved the prohibition on new stations last week. Wow, how about that? It doesn't become official until Monday, but the city of 60,000 has already 16 gas stations over its 15 square miles, meaning residents don't have to drive more than 5 minutes to find a pump. I love this story. I want to see more of that, and that is today's news dump. And now it's time to get to my guest. Joining me today is a United States Marine. He fought in Iraq, in Fallujah, and in 2008, he was blown up by an IED, lost his legs, amputated both of his legs, and he is here today to tell me all about his life story and why it matters and why he's talking about it. I have always been fascinated by military conflicts. I've always been devastated by how we've got into them in my lifetime. And I've always been against all of them that have occurred in my lifetime. At the same time, I think there is a complicated relationship with public service and veterans. And I've always wanted to get to know and tell the stories of veterans so that we don't have more of these wars. So it's clear what my agenda is, and it seems Steve Kiernan shares that. So I was very happy to have a discussion with him. I learned so much, and it's such an important conversation. Only hear a little bit of sound because he was using his hands a lot and I think bumping them on the desk, and hit some long pauses that I left most of which in because I thought it was really thoughtful how much he was thinking about such important issues, talking about everything that he had experienced and gone through. Steve Kiernan is on Twitter at MSG2Observer, at MSG2Observer. You can find him on his website at Steve-Kiernan. He is now a writer, writing fiction and doing activism and organizing, and just a great guy who I thoroughly enjoyed talking to. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Steve Kiernan right now. So, Steve, I really am interested in your story, and I loved our conversation that we had off the air, and I thought that if we had that similar conversation here on the air, people would take a lot away from it, hearing your perspective. You had a a really interesting story and life. You grew up on the West Coast out in California. Now you live in Oregon. But you told me that you had an uncle who was a Marine, and you really looked up to him, and he was an important role model to you. And that was one of the reasons why you always thought a job or a career in the military was a possibility for you, because of your uncle. Is that right?
Yeah, mostly because of him. Also, my grandfather, my uncle's father, he was in the Merchant Marines, but was on Wake Island when the Japanese attacked it. So he had to fight alongside the Marines for a couple of weeks until eventually the island was surrendered, and he was a POW for the rest of the war.
Wow.
But he died soon after I was born, so I never got to speak with him or really, I met him as a baby, but I don't remember that.
Right. Yeah.
So my uncle was the one who was more of my direct link to the military.
You were in high school when 9/11 happened, is that right?
Correct. I was a freshman.
Out there in California. How did it affect you? Maybe you can tell me about either that day or the time that followed it in terms of how that terrorist attack affected you, because you hear a lot from people who were in high school or that age around that time as it being obviously a really indelible event, and what they thought about maybe the world community, religion, terrorism. What did it mean to you? How did you interpret that?
It was quite a shock, obviously. For everyone, having spent my childhood in the 90s, which was, for a suburban kid in California, there's, not much going on except, skateboarding or something like that. Outside big world events seemed like something that took place, back in like my father's time or my grandfather's time. So when this huge, world event happened, in New York and DC, there was a Bay Area link to it as well, with a lot of the flights were coming to California. So a lot of Californians were on those flights. So we saw a lot of those stories in the local news of people who had passed away on those flights. So, for everyone in that during that time period, for weeks, months, really, we're just getting bombarded with all these stories and yeah, I don't know. It's kind of hard to explain.
Did it shape any of your views? Were you angry? Did you want revenge? At what point did you decide that you wanted to be a Marine? Because it's interesting when people join the military post 9/11 to ask them what their views were, or at that point.
I'd always thought about joining the military up until then. Because my uncle and all that, and I was just really into war movies, typical teenagers.
Yeah, I was too.
But that really solidified it for me. Was okay. This is something. It's not something. It's changed from something I'm interested in to something I feel like I have to do. I thought it was like my generation's calling, like Pearl Harbor. This is our time to step up and serve, be a part of something bigger than myself, and try to protect Americans and freedom and, all that stuff that sounds really cool to a, 16, 17-year-old.
When you look back at that now, or if you had the opportunity to talk to that kid now, have you ever thought about the conversation that you'd have with a younger you?
I don't even know what I would say, to be honest. Just because so much of who I am now is because of, my time in the military. I met my wife while I was in the military. I probably wouldn't have gone back to school had I not been in the military, just because I didn't have the kind of self-discipline at the time. So even though, my standard when talking to anyone else thinking about joining the military is I tell them, no, don't do it. I kind of hesitate to, tell my younger self that, just because I can't imagine, my life without having served, even though ultimately I have complicated views on, my time in service.
I certainly can understand that, and I actually expect that. How could you not? I wonder, what is it that you say to a young person thinking of joining the military now? What's the talk like?
I think ultimately it's a decision that someone has to make for themselves. I can't just go and say no, don't do it. It's bad or whatever. Even though I may believe that, I would tell them, I'm like, if it's something you feel you have to do or something you want to do, especially for people people don't have, economic status, right? Like they may not have any other options. Right. They can't afford to go to school. They feel to be stuck in a rut. They can't get a job. So the military looks like a nice, tempting escape for a couple of years. But I tell them, as part of that, you're giving up 4 years of your life, standard, if you do a standard enlistment, and you will be, they'll talk and tell you about how you're serving your country and how you're protecting Americans. But since 9/11, really nothing the military has done has contributed to, protecting American citizens, whether here or abroad. And in fact, we're basically just out there. I don't even know anymore. People say, we're doing imperialism and stuff like that. And, that's probably the easiest way to, explain it. But no one, at my level, or like even it seems like all the way up into the top levels, can tell us, why we are even in these places anymore, other than we have to maintain whatever influence we have in the area. Right. Or in Afghanistan, it's, if we pull out, then the Taliban are going to take over. But we're there right now, and the Taliban have pretty much taken over the entire country. So I don't see how we're preventing that from happening. And in fact, we're just increasing violence by being there. We're just, thousands of civilian casualties through bombings and stuff. So when I talk to, people trying to think about joining, I try to explain that to them. Like, you're going to be part of an institution that is, as it currently is, only exists to extract resources from other areas, for the benefit of American corporations. You're not going to be, you're not going out there. You're not protecting Americans from terrorism. You're not preventing attacks. Often you're just out there. You're inflicting harm on other people. You're inflicting trauma on other people, as well as, being exposed to all that yourself. And it just doesn't, some people can live with it and deal with it. But, myself, it became pretty clear to me once I actually deployed that this is not something I want to be a part of anymore.
Yeah, I want to talk about what happened there, because I think that's pretty much the most fascinating thing to explore with you in terms of your recognition of what your actual service would entail versus maybe what you thought it was going to be. I guess I'll let you explain it. But you joined the Marines right out of high school, right?
Yep. I actually took an extra class throughout my whole time in high school so I could graduate a semester early. Went to boot camp during I guess it would have been my last semester, senior year. I was in boot camp, came back from my high school graduation after I finished, and then, straight to infantry school, and then, 4 years in the military.
Then you had a really interesting first assignment where you were sent to do security basically at Camp David, which is the presidential retreat. And that was a pretty fascinating experience you talked about. And there were obviously elements of it that there was a certain boredom to, but also as soon as you say that, when I heard you say that, I was like, oh my gosh, Camp David. And most people, I don't think, get to go there. And you reported for work there. Tell me about first, is it boot camp? Is that what we call it in the Marines?
Yeah, boot camp. I think the Army calls it basic training.
Right. I think I actually said that to you. Where did you do your basic training? And I think you corrected me. I did my boot camp because it's different.
It's all interchangeable to me. I don't care what you call it.
I know you don't care, but the lingo matters to me. It's interesting just culturally the differences between the branches of military. But you went in San Diego to boot camp. How was that? What was that like? Is that like any of the movies?
Oh yeah, it was a wake up call. Honestly, Full Metal Jacket does a really good portrayal of it.
Really?
Minus the murder suicide.
Right. You didn't see. Did you see guys wash out though? Did you see guys have a lot of?
Yeah. There were plenty of guys who couldn't hack it. I went in 2005 though, so even if you couldn't hack it, they're forcing you through because they just needed bodies for the meat grinder. So a lot of people who should have never made it through boot camp were basically dragged to the finish line by drill instructors.
That sounds very cynical. Are you saying the Marine Corps lowered its standard because they didn't have the recruitment goals that they needed to fight the war in Iraq and Afghanistan?
I mean, they'll say they didn't lower the standards, but they definitely increased, or they had firm quotas of how many people they needed to graduate boot camp, and to, I guess, maintain numbers,
Right.
There was, I can think of two people in particular. I'm not going to name them. Mostly, I don't even remember one of them's name. But anyway, it was obvious, they shouldn't be there. I think one even probably had developmental mental problems. Yeah. Somehow, I guess his recruiter just said, "Yeah, you're good to go," and sent him in.
Wow.
He graduated, but then immediately went AWOL after for a month, and then ended up getting kicked out. But there's another guy who definitely got dragged through, shouldn't have made it, but he did, and then went on to serve in the infantry.
Wow, that's interesting. Was there any personal experience you could share about boot camp?
It's just a huge wake-up call, especially for, 17-year-old kid. I mean, I've been yelled at by my parents before, but it's nothing compared to when you get there and you got your drill instructor screaming at you, you're getting, smacked around in some cases. I learned really quickly just shut up, do what I was told as quickly as possible, and kept my head down and was able to just power through it without really being noticed most of the time. So that saved me from a lot of pain from the drill instructors, which was nice.
So you go to boot camp, and then what happens?
Boot camp, that's where I got selected for the Camp David stuff. They do selection for it in boot camp, where I think it's usually they have one of the officers in the program, the psychologist, and then an NCO in the program came out and ran through a PowerPoint presentation. And a bunch of 18-year-old kids, anything on a PowerPoint presentation sounds cool when you put pictures of SWAT teams and heavy metal music to it. So I signed up for it, thinking it was a lot cooler than it was. And then the benefit of also being so young, having never really gotten in trouble, never traveled before, I was a prime candidate who can make it through the security clearance process. So I got picked up pretty quick. And then go to infantry training at Camp Pendleton, security forces training out in Virginia Beach. And then 8th and I, as I basically do security there, waiting for security clearance, and then they ship you up either to Camp David or across the river to Bolling Air Force Base, which is the White House Communications Office, and that's where you basically just guard radio equipment.
Guard radio equipment.
Yeah, but those guys get to travel though, because all that equipment goes with the president wherever he goes.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
They at least get to go on international travel, whereas us at Camp David, we just stay at Camp David the whole time.
Did the president come there when you were there?
Yeah, Bush was there all the time. I think he has a record for the most time spent up there. So, I mean, there were periods where he'd be there for a month straight, or every week he'd come back up for a weekend or something. So we were constantly busy, constantly working. It's kind of crazy now because I hear stories of Marines who served up there during they're still up there. They spent, a whole, year or 2 years up there having never done a presidential visit because either Obama or Trump just rarely went up there.
Did you ever have any interaction with President Bush while you were there, or was that inappropriate? You're not allowed?
Generally, the rule of thumb is security should be not seen. So sometimes you find yourself in situations where, you hear over the radio that the president's coming your direction, or maybe you can see him coming, and you either got to duck inside of a building, or in some cases, guys jump into the bushes to try and hide.
Really?
But, other times you can't help it. So you just, you're in there's a bar up there in one of the buildings where, they serve food and alcohol, and they have a little mini arcade and stuff. And a lot of Marines and sailors up there hang out there. President hangs out there as well. So sometimes you'll be in there during a visit, maybe you just got off shift, and then all of a sudden the president walks in and there's no bush to hide in. So you just got to oh, hey, Mr. President, maybe he'll talk to you for a little bit, shake your hand, and then you just quietly make your way out. So mostly my interactions were like that, or, we would have photo ops where he would, especially during Christmas, the president and the first lady would do photo ops with all the military personnel up there. So you basically just get in a big assembly line. You go in, you get your picture with them, say Merry Christmas, move on, and then the next group comes in.
So you have a bunch of pictures of you and President Bush at Camp David?
I have a few. I think I have one, like a Christmas type photo. And then I have one with me and him in the Oval Office, which everyone gets when you leave. That's like your going away present is you go to the Oval Office and get your picture with him.
Do you have thoughts on him that you share publicly?
Yeah, I mean, I think he should be, him and his whole administration probably get shipped to The Hague, get tried for war crimes. But that'll never happen.
So let's talk about after Camp David when you deployed to Iraq. Is that right? Next?
Yep. I was up at Camp David. I'd been there for a year. Got my presidential service badge, which is just this little uniform badge they give you once you've done presidential service for a year. Mm-hmm. So I was like, all right, I got that. And I want to leave. So I requested orders to the fleet as soon as possible because, this was 2007. I was like, man, the war is winding down. I'm going to miss it. All my buddies from boot camp have been. I feel like I haven't done anything in the Marines since I've been in. All my buddies have been. I feel like I'm letting them down because I haven't been. All that kind of like naive, tough guy stuff that, Marines and soldiers, just naturally feel.
There's something, though, about, you can relate to with sports. You practice with the team, you get ready for the game. And then in my case, I always sat the bench. So, like, I never got in the game, and I always wanted to get in the game. I trained to be in the game. I wanted to be in the game. I mean, it doesn't sound like that pernicious in terms of the propaganda. When you train for something, whether you're a firefighter, a teacher, an athlete, you want to do the thing. I get that. I think that's understandable ambition, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Not that you need to buy.
It's like the ultimate test, especially being in a hyper masculine environment. You're not a real Marine, you're not a real man until you go test yourself in combat, right. all that bullshit that's that I tell people is bullshit before they join. I'm like, don't buy into that crap.
Did you subscribe to that at any point? I mean, I certainly did it growing up, the kind of the classic traditional masculinity and
definitely. When I was in high school, it's one of the reasons why I wanted to join. I wasn't this I wasn't some super physical stud. I played football for a couple years. I wasn't like super great at it. I wasn't terrible at it. Broke my collarbone. But, part of wanting to join the Marine Corps is, prove myself. Like, okay, I want to prove to everyone that I'm, a man, that I'm a badass. So how do you do that when you're 17 years old? Join the Marine Corps.
So right. And it's not enough to be in the Marine Corps and go through boot camp and then work at Camp David and have the honor and an interesting gig that would be. It's not enough. You still there's a war going on, and guys that you came up with have fought in it. Maybe you even knew guys who died in it at that point or been injured, and so you want to go, and so you sign up to go, and they send you. Is that how it works?
I mean, basically, when I went to my first sergeant's office, I'm like, all right, I got my PSB. I'm ready to hit the fleet and deploy.
PSB, that's a game console?
Oh, no, PSB, the Presidential Service Badge.
I didn't. Imagine, I've got my game console. I'm ready to go to Iraq. I'm sure guys did. They probably were a pretty hot commodity, actually. So you got your clearance, and then you get your orders?
Yeah, I had to wait a couple months for my orders to come through. I got orders to 3rd Battalion, 6th Marines out of Camp Lejeune. Yeah, went to a couple schools real quick and then checked in, did a very quick workup because they were deploying. I got there November 07, and we deployed March 08. So it's just a quick couple months of training before we left.
And was that training specific to what you would likely see in Iraq? Basically?
Yeah. It was a pre-deployment workup for Iraq, pretty much standard that all Marines, especially infantry Marines, were going through, those years. So just a lot of infantry training, you spend a month out at 29 Palms doing training out there, a lot of live fire training, a lot of simulated attacks and stuff like that. And then the end of that, there's like this big 10-day exercise where they have this mock-up village where you go and patrol, and they have hundreds or at least dozens of role players and Arabic speaking people, and they run through a whole bunch of different scenarios. And that's kind of like your last big thing before you deploy.
Do you feel like that prepared you as well as you could possibly be prepared? I mean, I can imagine that that must be difficult to prepare someone for a war zone, but this day and age, you can kind of create a town simulation, and like you said, Arabic speakers and all that. I would think they do the best that they probably can to prepare you for whatever they decide the mission is going to be. But do you think that that training was good, was helpful, helped you get ready?
I mean, it's probably as close as training could ever get. I mean, it certainly sets you up, like, tactically, to be tactically proficient, with regular, infantry squad tactics and stuff like that.
Was it fun?
Yeah, I mean, training is always fun. It's hard. It's a huge kick in the ass. You feel like you're actually doing what you signed up to do, You're shooting stuff, blowing stuff up, all that's fun. But yeah, it still doesn't compare to, the real thing.
So let's talk about the real thing. When do you land in Iraq, and what happens? Like, it might seem boring to you, but like, I think that stuff is some of the maybe more mundane memories or traditions are pretty interesting to those who've not served it or much less been deployed. So, like, what happens? You fly to Iraq and you land and they send you to a base. Do you know where you're going to be going when you're on the plane over there? What are you thinking about?
Yeah, I think I want to say 2 or 3 weeks before we left, they told us where we were going to be going, because we knew we were going to Iraq. We just didn't know where. So they told us, okay, we're going to Fallujah. And then, as you get closer, maybe a week out, they'll say, okay, well, this is where your specific company is going to be in the city. This is going to be your general area of operations, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, and then when you fly out there, it took us a couple of days. We flew through... We took a flight from North Carolina to Maine, and then Maine to Ireland, and then Ireland to Germany. And we got stuck in Germany for 24 hours. I forget why. I think there's some plane that blew up on the tarmac. We were supposed to land in Kuwait or something. But anyway, once we, they just locked us inside of a hangar for a day, and then get to Kuwait, spent a couple of days in Kuwait, and then they stick you on the C-130, fly up north, and then you're in Iraq.
Then what? I mean, you land in Iraq and they send you to. Do you know where you're going? A certain base? Do you have any idea what your mission is going to be? I mean, you must be thinking there are certain parts of Iraq that are seeing more action, or that are more dangerous, or that have the kind of role that I want to play than others. Is that the kind of conversation? Where are you going? Oh, I'm going over here. They're going over there. They're sending all the Marines. Is all that happening at that point?
There was a little bit of confusion right around the time we left and when we got there, because there was a big Shia uprising that spring, particularly in Basra. Mm-hmm. And, there was a lot of rumors going around that we were going to be sent into Basra to help kind of put that down. I don't know if that was ever true. I don't think it was. Just Lance Corporals, talking. Yeah. We ended up not going there. We just went to Fallujah, or we went to Camp TQ to Kadam, which is a huge air base right in between Fallujah and Ramadi. That's kind of where we landed. Then we got our ammo loaded up into 7 tons and convoyed that night out to another base just south of Fallujah. It was called Bahriya. I think it used to be a palace. It was just a big rubber pile with a lake around it, and just a whole bunch of Marines. Spent a couple days there, further acclimatizing, whatever. Right. Sorry,
I think it's acclimating, but I like
acclimating. That's it.
Either way, I get what you're trying to say. You're just hanging out there at the lake, basically, in Iraq.
They got a bunch of temporary barracks that they put up there. It's kind of like a holding area, and then. My platoon, after a couple of days, moved out. We were going inside the city we were living at a Iraqi police station in the southwestern side of Fallujah. And our area of operation for my platoon was pretty much going to be that whole entire southwest corner of the city. And then it was doing patrols. We meet up with the guys who are there that we were replacing. They go on a couple patrols with us, get us, give us kind of a lay of the land, and then they leave, and then it's us, on our own.
What had you heard about that had happened in Fallujah with Marines up until that point in terms of what you were expecting to see and to be doing?
All Marines know the huge battle that went on there, or two battles that went on there in 2004. We actually had a couple guys in our company that were in those battles. So they told us a little bit about that. For the most part, this was 2008. So this is during the surge, right at the tail end of the surge. Things were kind of chill, as much as they can be in a war zone. There weren't huge battles and huge firefights going on. It was mostly, occasional IEDs, occasional snipers, etc. So it wasn't something. We didn't feel like we were going into like a big hot zone, And for the most part, that was true. For about a month, we were just kind of chilling, doing patrols every single day, both mounted in Humvees and dismounted, mostly dismounted.
Meaning just walking around the streets?
Yeah, pretty much. They would, we had to do 3 patrols a day, split between, 3 squads. So we would usually, depending on the rotation, we'd go out in the morning, walk around for a couple hours, come back, maybe stand post for a few hours, and then go back out on another patrol in the evening. And then it was kind of like that, just, Groundhog Day over and over again. Sometimes you do patrols in the day, sometimes you do patrols at night. A couple times a week, we would, they would have us go, do a raid. Raid makes it sound a lot cooler than it really is. I think the term we used at the time was, or the euphemism at the time was cordon and knock. So we would cordon off a building with Marines posted around it so no one can come in or out. And then we would go and knock on the door and ask to come in and do a search.
You're putting quote marks up around ask. So did you not ask? Did you just enter?
And pretty much. We go up, we knock on the door, and we're supposed to be polite, like, oh, can we, we want to search your house. Can we come in?
Steve, were they random or were they targeted? Meaning you thought that there was somebody or something in this home or residence that you needed to find, or was it more just random?
Honestly, I would say mostly just random. Even the times when we had targeted intel, like, hey, there's going to be a bomb maker here, or hey, this guy is connected somehow with financing or something. None of it ever, we were never given any evidence or provided any substantial evidence that proving that. We were just, the bottom tier grunts, maybe we don't warrant that information, but none of it felt, I don't know, legit, I guess. I get the feeling like some intel officer just pointed at a map and was like, okay, well, we got to do we have a quota to keep. So let's go search a building in this neighborhood. Let's go search a building in that neighborhood.
Sounds like you're leaving it open that there might have been some strategy, but it certainly didn't seem like that to you. And you told me about at least one experience that really kind of disenchanted you. And I was really interested to hear that when we talked. So do you mind sharing that now?
Yeah.
Maybe there was more than one experience, but there was one.
The first one where I went into the house, I guess, because we had done a couple before, but I had always been outside security. The first one where I was actually conducting the search is where I really learned, how bullshit, not just this raid, but the whole war was, and how awful it was. We go in, It's like 2 a.m, 3 a.m. We disturb these people. There's a big, there's a group of us, there's, a squad. So there's like 10, 12 of us there, all body armor, with weapons. Again, asking to come in as much as, as much as you can ask in that kind of power dynamic, and, when you're part of an occupying force, the locals don't really have a choice, no matter how much pretending you want to, pretend that they do, they don't. So we go in and it's disturbing. Imagine if a bunch of basically a SWAT team with guns came up to your house and was like, hey, we want to search your house. And then said, oh, hey, we have to separate you from your children and your wife. And, oh, hey, this piece of wiring looks suspicious. So we're going to, blindfold you and take you away, So we go in Immediately, kids start crying because they're scared.
Sure.
The women are crying because, they're scared. They don't know what's going on. I mean, the kids really don't know what's going on. They just see strangers with guns.
The kids are crying because they don't know what's going on. The women are crying because they do know what's going on.
Yeah, they know what's going on, but they don't know what's going to happen.
Right. Like, they know they have
is this the time where they take my husband or my son away from me? So they're, worried for many different reasons. We split them up and they're all crying and screaming. And that was really unsettling. And then, you pull the military age males aside, which is pretty much anyone over the age of like 12. Talk to them as best you can through a language barrier. And then just start searching their house, messing up their house, taking stuff down, going through all their boxes, all that comes with everything like that comes with the standard search. Of course, we don't find anything because there's nothing to find because it's just a house full of normal people, trying to live their life in a war zone. And that was what really changed my mind about the whole thing. Like I went from, being a typical like gung-ho Marine, and I was 20 years old at this time, didn't know shit about anything. Right. I don't know. It just really rubbed me the wrong way. I didn't like it. Didn't want to be there anymore. Yeah. I mean, we didn't take anyone away that night. We didn't find anything. I like to think we tried to be as nice and gentle as we could, which is, ridiculous to think about. But those are the things, those are what I mainly regret, participating in. I
appreciate you, telling me about that. And I'm sorry if, just bringing up these memories is challenging, but I'm just guessing when you live through something like that, when you play that role, no matter who you are, it might stay with you and might, dare I say, haunt you. It might be there as a learning lesson. It might go away. You might find a way to find closure on some of the things that you might have in life felt bad about doing. It's hard, I think, for most of us to relate. I mean, I got arrested for bashing mailboxes, but I got arrested and I had to go repair the mailboxes. Is it true that we didn't repair all of the mailboxes that we bashed? Yeah, that's true, but I have settled with it. That's as close as I feel like I can relate to doing something like kind of bad. In your case, in war and life, we all interpret these things differently. So my question to you is, does that night or other nights that you did similar things before you're injured, do they stay with you? How does it feel to talk about it right now with me or anybody?
I mean, definitely stays with me. I don't want to say it. I feel like saying it haunts me would be hyperbole, but there's definitely feelings of guilt and regret over having done them. And I don't know. It's just like, it's like that meme, are we the baddies? Finally realizing like, wait, I thought I was the good guy here, but we weren't. Over time, now I have, for years, I didn't have any kind of way of, expressing that or any words of how to, explain that. Not even to other people, but like to myself. Like I didn't understand, what those feelings were. And it's only, years later where I've, developed an understanding of, what exactly it was, I was participating in and how it was just screwing with these people's lives. And like I said before, inflicting trauma on innocent people for no real reason.
Do you ever think about, have you done anything to like kind of go back and find certain people to make in any way kind of make amends? I'm not saying that you should have any responsibility to do anything, but I can see someone wanting to be like, you know what? I feel bad about this thing that happened in my life and I'd like to try to do this or that about it. Is that something that people ever do or talk about doing in some way to get some kind of closure on it? Like you want to go to Fallujah and knock on doors and be like, hey, I might have come to your house one night and I just want to say, here's a present.
No, I have, I wouldn't even know which houses to go to anymore because I'm, especially with, the rise of ISIS and everything that's gone in that area. Yeah. I don't even know if those people are still alive, to be honest, or if they even still live there, if they're refugees somewhere. So in that sense, like, obviously I can't go back and like apologize to these people personally.
I'm not suggesting that you do anything, by the way. I know.
But no, I have no desire to ever go back there. Mostly because I just don't belong there. Like I didn't belong there in the first place. The best apology I could offer is, to try to bring all the troops home and just make sure we don't go back there ever again. So I think that is what you're trying to do in your own way with your writing, with talking to me, just to teach people, your own experience. And the best, the only thing I can really do is to do everything I can now, either, through politics or activism or whatever, to raise awareness, try to end the wars, trying to bring the troops home, and just to talk to people about my experience. And it's not what they advertise it.
Can we talk about the day that you got injured?
Yeah, sure.
You were on patrol, foot walking?
Yeah, we were on a foot patrol. Fairly normal, standard security patrol.
Can I ask you before you get into it? I'm sorry. Had you seen action up until this point? Have you been fired a gun? You been fired at? Had you lost guys? Seen injuries up until this point?
No, up until this point, we hadn't been in any kind of kinetic engagements. There'd been like explosions throughout the city. There's tons of gunfire going off, but a lot of it was different militia groups fighting one another, especially because all the Iraqi police were pretty much exclusively Shiites from like Baghdad, and Fallujah is all Sunni Muslims. So they hated each other. So the Iraqi police were getting in fights a lot. They were abusing people. That seemed to be their main focus, was they wanted the insurgents or the militias. They were done fighting us. They're like, we don't really care about them too much. We just want to fight these police here, because they viewed them as oppressors.
Yeah,
Shiites coming in, telling them what they can't do, etc. All that stuff.
The ethnic violence is often undercovered by
there's a lot of ethnic violence going on.
So sorry to take you out of that. So there you are, you're on foot doing a patrol that you'd done several times before. You mentioned earlier you're doing them like 3 times a day or something. So this was pretty routine.
Yeah, it's pretty routine. By this time, I knew the whole area. I didn't even need a map. I could walk that whole AO, all of southwestern Fallujah without a map and know exactly where I was. So I was familiar with the area. We all were familiar with the area, and familiar with some of the people that we would see, every day, shopkeepers, stuff like that.
Yeah, sure. Would you say would you say familiar? Would you say friendly? Did you say, hey, hello to specific people? Were you encouraged to do that? Was there really?
I wouldn't say it was friendly, no. I would say we were familiar, but they didn't really want to have anything to do with us.
Okay.
They were, whenever we'd come up to talk to them, they would be reluctant participants, they would just put up with us until we left, basically.
Right, understandable.
Yeah. I wouldn't want to be friends with us either.
Right. No, I'm good. Thank you, Marine. Thank you. Appreciate it. Move along. Yeah.
So, we were coming back in from patrol. Always the most dangerous part of a patrol is leaving lines and re-entering lines, because there's only so many ways you can come back and leave, so they know generally where you're going to be. And they had placed I think it was a mortar round inside of a garbage dumpster. And when we were walking by it, I was on point. They detonated it. I believe it was a command detonated, with a cell phone or radio or something like that. So someone was watching us and then set it off. Blew me up, took out my legs. Wounded another one of my Marines, broke his arm, gave him a real bad concussion. It actually cracked his helmet in half, which is crazy.
Jesus.
And then
it's interesting. For a moment, boy, I've never quite heard the what is it called? The vibration, the concussion, physical effect of an explosion being very close to it sends a vibration kind of through you, and therein lies, I believe, traumatic brain injury, because what it does is it shakes your brain inside of your skull. And I guess when you I don't know, maybe it was a piece of shrapnel, maybe when it hit the ground or something, that's what caused the helmet to break. But the way that you phrase it made it sound like it was what I'm talking about. The concussion effect was so powerful that it cracked the helmet. I'm not sure if that's what you're insinuating or not, but it would certainly explain the brain injuries that we hear about, because you're near an explosion.
Yeah, that's probably 90% of traumatic brain injuries are just caused by the concussion. Guys will be in an explosion, not have a scratch on them, but, have a moderate to severe concussion, and right. You a lot of a lot of friends I know would just shrug it off and be like, okay, I got my bell rung, not really realizing how serious it was. Only later, years later, a lot of them are having problems now, mentally.
So this shell goes off and you said takes your legs out. I mean, what's the next thing you remember?
Well, I didn't get knocked unconscious. I was awake for it the whole time. So got blown up, at first it's like this huge blast of heat, it just feels like super hot. You feel that rumbling in your chest from, the reverberations and the concussions. I remember hitting the ground, and then it just felt like my legs were on fire. So I looked down, my legs were a mess, they're all torn up, I think my foot was staring at me the wrong way. I remember my left leg looked totally fine, except my boot had been blown off. So I just saw my white socks, and I was like, well, I can't move that leg, but it looks fine. So I didn't think anything was wrong with that one. But later I found out my heel had been blown off. So it ended up having to be amputated.
The foot.
Yeah, then it was just a rush to get me back to Camp Decatur, where they had a big emergency trauma center there for the hospital. And it's basically just a mad dash in Humvees. I think one of them, the engine basically exploded. Not like exploded, but they blew the engine on it and it just shut down. So they ended up leaving it there with the guys in it, and just kept hauling ass to get me and my other Marine to, get medical care. We get there. I remember just being surrounded by nurses and doctors, and they're like cutting all your clothes off and like asking you questions or whatever. And then that was it. They put me out. I woke up in Baghdad, maybe a day or two later.
Were you scared that whole time that you're going to die? Or that you were going to lose your legs?
I thought I was going to die. The only thing, I don't know, being scared just because it's, when you're in that situation, there's so much happening. It's hard to feel any kind of legit emotion, or it's hard to comprehend exactly what's happening to you. But in my mind, I thought because I was getting real exhausted and tired, probably from blood loss. And I remember thinking if I fall asleep or close my eyes, then I'll die. So I kept trying to keep myself awake. That was the only thing I was really concerned about, was just falling asleep. I had an idea, I guess, that I was like, okay, this might be it. I don't think I gave it much more thought than that. It's also been, this is 2008, so it's been a while. A lot of it has kind of faded away, the exact, all the moments and everything. I just kind of have, the big, mostly, the general emotional feelings and the general physical sensations, I guess.
So what came next? You went to Germany for a night, and then you flew back to Walter Reed, I think you told me, and you told me that because of something about flying, you're not allowed to have the certain painkillers or something. And so the worst physical pain that you suffered from being blown up that day was basically in the air, when you weren't allowed to have certain drugs that you needed to numb it. Do I have that right? Is that what you told me?
Yeah. Well, I guess, I don't know. In the moment, getting blown up and all that, that definitely was painful and hurts a lot. But there's so much adrenaline going through you that I don't want to say you don't feel it, but it's
different.
Yeah, it's different. But
shock.
Yeah, I guess because they were flying me back to the Bethesda Naval Hospital in Maryland.
Yep.
So for whatever reason, flying and either being unconscious, being sedated, for whatever reason, they don't want to do that because they think you're going to, I don't know, throw up in your sleep and choke to death or something. So they gave me a couple pain pills to last me for 24 hours or so, because they couldn't give it to me while I was in Germany, and I was there for 24 hours. And then the flight itself is several hours long. So I just remember it was also a I don't know what they call it, but it's like a casualty plane. It's like all the casualties going back to the U.S. are all in there. So it's just stacks with guys from Iraq and Afghanistan getting sent home. So it was being on a stretcher, but they stack you like one right after the other, after the other.
Wow.
To where you only really have like an inch or two from like your nose to the guy above you.
What?
And then walking wounded are like on the sides of the plane. Yeah, it was just a big nightmare. It was just, you're just stuck there. I'm strapped in. I got my arms just like strapped across my chest, so I can't move. I'm in pain the whole time. I threw up. Sorry to whoever was below me in the stack, but I got motion sickness, so I had to just like turn my head and throw up. And
sounds absolutely horrific experience.
Yeah, and then they got flight nurses going around checking on people, trying to keep people alive, so stuff like that. It was not something I would want anyone to go through.
So you get back to stateside, and then you go through a series of surgeries until you get. I mean, how do you talk about how you measure the kind of the surgeries and beginning to end to kind of where you're at now with your health?
Yeah, well, so in Iraq at the first base we went to, they did an immediate amputation of I think my left foot and then my right leg just below the knee. They try to take as little as possible, send you back, and then other doctors like back in the States decide, okay, do we need to take more? They ended up amputating more once I got back because my knee was just too badly damaged. So I got amputated above the knee on the right side. My left leg, they amputated about halfway up to my knee, mostly just because it would make wearing prosthetics easier. And then...
Are those decisions that you weigh in on?
No, they just make it for you. They basically just say like, oh, we're going into surgery. We're going to take this off. We're going to take this off. But yeah, they don't, it's not like an option they give you.
Right.
Luckily, I didn't have any infections, so I didn't have to have any serious follow-on surgeries. I had to have, there was some extra bone growth that I had to get removed like 7 months later. But yeah, some guys, you get, when you get blown out in you end up in like a sewage ditch or something like that. So a lot of guys get really bad infections in their wounds. And, I've heard of guys going in like 100 surgeries, trying to clear it all out. And, someone might start off with 2 below the knee amputations. But by the end of it, they're like almost all the way up to their hip on both sides just because of infections.
Oh my God.
Luckily, I avoided that, so it pretty much a fairly quick recovery.
But you stayed in that hospital, I think you said, for 2 years. Is that right?
Yeah. So I was at Bethesda Naval Hospital for, I want to say, a month, and then they transferred me to Walter Reed, which is where they had the amputee program.
Right. I actually got a tour of that one day, briefly, and it seemed pretty impressive.
Yeah, that's where I got there. It was right after they had the big scandal where the big Washington Post article that exposed a lot of the poor treatment and poor facilities they had there. So there was guys with like mold in their rooms and rats and cockroaches and stuff.
I forgot about that. Yeah.
So after that, the Army was obviously they needed to boost their PR, right? So they just pumped tons of money into creating this really nice physical therapy facility with all kinds of weird, crazy equipment. There was like a rock climbing wall in there. They had a track where they would hook you up to a harness and it would connect to the ceiling and you would walk around. And then if you fall, the harness would catch you so you wouldn't fall and hurt yourself. So all kinds of cool stuff like that. And yeah, the Army wanted to show it off. Hey, we're treating our guys really well. Come take a look. So, we'd be in there working out, and every single day, there'd be a new tour coming through of VIPs.
That was definitely me. I might have walked past you. I think I was there later, but I'm a member of a media.
Yeah, a lot of Congress people and stuff like that.
Yeah. So, what were you doing there for 2 years? What is that? What was your existence like? What were you learning? What were you recovering? How were you recovering? What was that about?
Pretty much learned to use prosthetics, learn how to walk again. I guess trying to learn how to reintegrate, Is
there a lot of psychological work? Is there a lot of like, this is your life now, this is your body now, this is, is it a constant work emotionally, psychologically that you have to I'm sure everybody has a completely different experience, but is that part of like a curriculum that you have? Is it optional? What is it?
Therapy wise, like psychiatry, stuff like that, optional mostly from my experience. I think they would have you go in and do like a mandatory one session or something. Yeah. And then you would continue it at your leisure. I would probably say like 90% of the guys never went back again. Again, you know, that kind of like hyper masculine, toxic masculine ideal of, you know, I don't need help. I can just tough through it. I don't need to talk about my feelings, et cetera, et cetera.
It's actually a sign of weakness, not strength.
Yeah, yeah.
Strength is as confronting your horrible nightmares and ghosts. That's hard to do. It's hard to be in combat, and it's hard to confront your feelings. It's hard. Those are hard things to do. But I think if I'm going to use, I think I said weak. Maybe that was a bit too hyperbolic. But I mean, it's this idea that you're weak to get therapy. You know, the opposite is 100% true. It's so hard to confront your demons for anybody, whether or not you've had, you know, combat or it's just your childhood weight issue. I mean, it doesn't matter what it is, but it's hard to confront that shit, your relationship with your parent, whatever. And so it takes strength to do that, is the way that I define it. Sorry for talking so much there. I want to get your take on it, but I mean,
no, I agree. I mean, I was one of those people. I didn't seek help, and I should have. You know, caused some problems for me later on. I know it caused a lot of problems for guys later on. A lot of people. There's a lot of self-medication going on, alcohol, drugs. Mostly prescription drugs that they were basically tossing at us like candy. You know, you could go basically get as much Percocet or morphine or whatever as you wanted. You just say, yeah, I'm having pain. And then they'd be like, okay, here's 30 pills. So a lot of guys just resorted to that.
Yeah, I had morphine once. It's delicious.
Yeah, I mean, opioids are nice.
Amazing.
That's why they're so bad for you.
No doubt about it. So what has been your hardest challenge or struggle? Is there anything that's continues? Is there an individual thing that you had to try to overcome? What's been hardest for you to adapt and adjust to everything that you've been through, or maybe you've dealt well with it? I don't know.
One thing is I struggled with opioid addiction.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, well, I was there because I was on Oxycontin, I was on Percocet, I was on Dilaudid, ketamine, basically everything. And they don't tell you this is super addictive when you're taking it. They don't tell you it's bad.
Come on, they really don't say anything. They really don't warn you at all about the... I mean, back then, hopefully that's changed, but...
I mean, this was like 2008. This is 2008, so it was, I guess, right at before the opioid crisis really took off.
Yeah, but it's so fucked up because the company who made them knew it. So whether or not the guys issuing them, prescribing them, handing them out knew it is separate to some extent. So who knows? But yeah, so wow. So how bad was that?
It took me a long. I didn't even know I was addicted for a long time. Basically until I ran out of pills one day, just getting stuck between prescriptions, and then going through withdrawals. And I was like, oh crap, this sucks. But yeah, it was 11 years. It took me 11 years to finally kick the habit, I guess.
What were those 11 years like? You were using pretty much regularly, on and off? You quit?
Every day, like every 3 hours.
You used opiates straight for 11 years?
Yeah, pretty much.
How did that affect your life? How did you get them?
Oh, through the VA.
So you got them legitimately prescribed to you, and you didn't.
Yeah. I was basically the VA was my drug dealer, and I had a steady supply coming. They would give me 90 pills at a time, and that would last me a month. And then, when it got to be day 28, 29, I would call up to get it refilled, and it would get refilled, and I'd go pick up 90 more, and it was like that for 11 years. I was pretty disciplined where I was so terrified of running out because withdrawals just suck so bad that I would discipline myself to not take more than, 3 or 4 pills a day, which would be like every 3 hours that I was awake. I would wake up in the morning, take a pill, around lunchtime, take a pill, around 3 or 4, take a pill. And then in the evening, take a pill, or a sleeping pill. I became dependent on Ambien for years as well.
Oh man, that stuff's powerful.
Yeah, and that was my life. I would schedule my day around when I needed to take a pill.
Well, what was your life like? What were you doing during that time?
For the first few years, so I got out, I retired 2010, moved down to Virginia.
Do you get a full are you like taken care of financially for the rest of your life based on losing your legs? I mean, what's the deal?
So I've always found this like fascinating.
By the way, is that like a rude question?
No, I mean,
I know a little bit about.
Like, if we were just like normal people, like, oh hey, are you,
in certain situations, if we were just having a drink at a bar, and I was like, first question, no, but I think it's important. I think it's important that we take care of. Like, a good friend of mine's lost her husband in the Marines, and she's a Marine herself. But like the government takes care of her for like the rest of her life. Financially, she gets a certain benefits and income, and I think that's the least you can do. So, I mean, I would assume that you're taken care of somehow, some way. I mean, you lost your legs in Iraq as a Marine in combat. So I just assumed that, but I didn't mean to be rude by asking.
No, I got rated 100% disabled. So I get my monthly VA compensation check for the rest of my life, tax-free, which is good. I also, someone in the government one day decided that a limb costs $50,000, or that's how much it's worth. So I lost both legs, so they paid me $100,000.
What do you think of that number?
I've always been like fascinated by it. Just because I always think like the guy or the woman or the person who came up with that number, like I really just want to sit down and talk with them and be like, how did you come up with this number? Like how do you put a price on a limb? You know?
Well, they must have some kind of actuarial about how many limbs they think that, like, it's got to be a budgetary matter, right? And it's like, what's the difference between $1 million and $100,000? Like, how are you deciding on this? But the thing about the war in Iraq versus every conflict between it was guys would often die. They wouldn't live their lives that they'd had their legs blown off, is my understanding about everything from the Civil War all the way through even Vietnam. And so the idea now is an actuarial thing where it's like, well, we're going to be able to take care of them, modern medicine, for his, natural life. And that's going to cost X amount of money. I'm just making shit up right now, straight out of my asshole. But I'm guessing that there's something like that in the fact that you're going to live. That's why we need to consider, before we fight a war, the budget for what it's going to cost to take care of the warriors. And we don't even think about that at all. We don't think about the cost of war in any way, much less the cost of the post-war health care. And it's like trillions and trillions of dollars, of course.
Yeah, I mean, there's everyone, every election cycle, people are outraged at the VA. There's always a VA scandal going on. Our troops are getting taken care of. VA budget needs to be increased. We do everything we can. But no one ever questions, like, well, the best way to take care of our veterans is to stop having these wars, the best way to help veterans is to stop creating them in the first place. So, yeah, I mean, especially back then, during the surge and then right when the Afghanistan surge kicked off, it was nuts. New guys were coming into Walter Reed, like, by the busload every week. So much so that they couldn't even take them all. They had to send guys to San Diego. They would send guys to Texas. Some guys they would just ship home and to get treated by their local VA, only to be completely forgotten about and fall through the cracks. But yeah, it was so intense, especially, the wounds coming back, a lot of amputees, a lot of lost limbs, just, that's just the nature of combat in Iraq and Afghanistan with IEDs and such, that they actually had to change the rules for, paying off for your limbs, right? Because it was $50,000 per limb, but it capped at $100,000, so 2 limbs. But guys were coming back, triple amputees, quadruple amputees. Those guys were only getting $100,000, even though they lost, more than 2 limbs. So I think they changed it. I'm almost positive they changed it to where those guys could actually, get the full amount of money for their legs and arms. Yeah, it was nuts for a long time.
How are you doing now? How would you're married?
Yeah, married. I mean, I met my my wife basically, as soon as I got to DC, fresh out of boot camp and all that, she was going to college there. I was stationed there, and that was 2005. We've been together ever since.
So she was there through all of what we talked about.
Yeah, she was there through all of it.
Wow.
Yep,
and
still here.
Including drugs.
She's still putting up with me.
Yeah. Ah, dude. Well, I'd like to interview her next. Well, listen, man, I'll let you go. I have a billion more questions for you, but we've been talking for over an hour, and I can't imagine, that this is necessarily easy for you to do. So I can't thank you enough for just sharing your thoughts and on all of it, your own experience. And I'd love to talk again about your views on all kinds of different, foreign policy and the role of America and all that. I know that you've got strong views about all that, but I wanted to just have this conversation just to let folks know, my audience know who you are and what you've done and experienced in your life to give you, I think, fair to say, the credibility to talk about all of those other issues. So I really, really appreciate you joining me and talking and telling your story and sharing with us in such an honest and vulnerable way. I know I can say right now, it means a lot to a lot of people. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, thanks for giving me the platform to talk. Thanks for asking the questions. There's a lot of talk about the military-civilian divide and that neither side understands each other. And a lot of blame gets placed on the civilian side of not understanding us. But really, most of that blame should be put on us ourselves for not, communicating our own experiences to people. So that's kind of how I see my role now is, talk to people about my experiences. Hopefully that will, help them make better their own personal decisions, maybe to help shape their politics a little bit so that, to be a little bit better.
Well, certainly does mine. You made a huge impression on me sharing your experience. And I can't thank you enough. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Well, there you go. How about that? Steve Kiernan, and his story is really something else. I hope that you'll reach out to him. There is contacts, of course, on the show notes to connect with Steve and everybody else all the time. He's on Twitter at MSG2Observer. His website, steve-kiernan.com. And that is all I've got for you today. Coming up later this week, Glenn Kirshner, Wajid Ali, Professor Eric Siegel, Christian Finnegan, and who else? Who else should I have? Send me your ideas for female guests. After all, it is International Women's History Month, and I'd love to try to talk more about issues that women are interested in and care about, and that, of course, the men who support them do as well. All right, I am done. That is it. Thank you very much for tuning in. Support the podcast with a paid subscription, please, if you haven't already. Thank you very much. Go to the paid subscription link in the show notes, or just go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic. And now, singer-songwriter John Carroll, take us out, if you will.
Get up off of your knees. When you can't see the forest for the burning trees, you got to stand up. Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you got to stand up. Stand up. I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know us right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. You got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had They knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well, and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up. Stand up. Got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up. People got the power. Stand up. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Stand up.
I'm so sick of fucking Donald Trump, man. God, I'm fucking sick of him.
Oh, and we're sick of you too, Alex Jones. But you know who we're not sick of? Dolly Parton.
So I just want to say to all of you cowards out there, don't be such a chicken squat. Get out there and get shot.
Oh, we love you, Dolly Parton. Long live Dolly Parton. And you. Love you. Bye.